The known galaxy had spent approximately 14,000 years cataloguing which planets would gleefully murder anyone stupid enough to land on them. This was considered basic due diligence, the sort of thing civilized species did to avoid embarrassing extinction events. Death worlds earned their classification through rigorous scientific analysis, historical body counts, and the occasional probe that stopped transmitting mid-scream, which was technically impossible but happened anyway on planets rated Class 9 or higher. Vidantia 7 held the dubious honor of being rated Class 12. To understand what this meant, one needed to appreciate that the classification system only went to 10 when it was first created. Vidantia 7 had forced the Galactic Ecological Survey Corps to add 2 entirely new categories, invent 6 new terms for types of aggressive botanical behavior, and retire 3 researchers who developed a phobia of anything green. The planet was a nightmare wrapped in chlorophyll, a testament to what happened when evolution decided that cooperation was for weak species and turned the entire food chain into a free-for-all grudge match. The Zytharians had tried to colonize it first, roughly 2 centuries ago. They were an accomplished species, known for their botanical expertise and ability to coax crops from asteroids. They lasted 9 days. The official report stated they had been absorbed by the local ecosystem, which was diplomatic language for we found their ship covered in vines and no bodies, just some suspicious-looking fruit. Next came the Krelleth, who approached the problem with their characteristic military precision. They brought plasma cutters, atmospheric processors, and enough firepower to level a small moon. They managed 3 weeks before their commanding officer sent a single message: "The trees are learning." Their evacuation was so hasty they left half their equipment behind. Vidantia 7 was still using their fusion generators, though they were now encased in what appeared to be symbiotic bark and possibly sentient. The pattern repeated itself with depressing regularity. The Fenari attempted settlement and vanished. The Quolox established a research station that went silent after the 6th day, though occasionally it still broadcasted screaming. In botanical form, the galactic consensus became ironclad. Vidantia 7 was beautiful, resource-rich, strategically located, and absolutely not worth dying over. Someone should have mentioned this to the humans. The colony ship Perseverance entered Vidantia 7's orbit on a Tuesday, which would later be recognized as cosmically appropriate. Tuesdays were when humans traditionally did things they would regret. The vessel was a converted cargo hauler, which told you everything about humanity's approach to interstellar colonization. Where other species built sleek exploration craft with redundant safety systems, humans took whatever was available, strapped enough engines to it to achieve faster-than-light travel, and hoped the welding would hold. Dmitry Kovach stood on the bridge, observing the planet below with the expression of a man who had made worse decisions and survived them. He was built like someone who had personally wrestled his way off Earth's gravity well, all pragmatic muscle and angular features that suggested Slavic ancestry and a lifetime of ignoring safety warnings. His grey-streaked hair was pulled into a practical knot, and his eyes held the dangerous calm of someone who considered certain death a challenge rather than a deterrent. Readings confirmed the previous surveys, announced Yuki Tanaka from the science station, her voice containing entirely too much enthusiasm for someone describing a planet that ate colonists. She was small, energetic, and possessed the unsettling cheerfulness of a botanist who considered deadly flora interesting rather than concerning. Oxygen-rich atmosphere, aggressive plant life, fungal networks spanning entire continents, and oh, the carnivorous canopy layers are magnificent. Magnificent, repeated Marcus Webb from engineering, his Australian accent turning the word sardonic. He was a broad-shouldered man who treated physics as a suggestion and building codes as light reading for entertainment. That's one word for it. I've got 16 others, and most of them are swearing. Preliminary scans show the Krelleth equipment is still functional, added Zainab Hassan, fingers dancing across her terraforming console. She wore her dark hair in elaborate braids and had the focused intensity of someone who saw potential in places others saw graves. Interesting. The planet hasn't destroyed the technology, it's integrated it. That's what concerns the Galactic Survey Corps, noted Dmitri, pulling up the official warnings that cluttered their communication array. 23 different species had filed formal advisories against this landing. 17 had offered to relocate the humans to safer worlds, which in galactic terms ranged from merely hostile to only mostly lethal. 3 had simply sent funeral arrangements. Survey Corps doesn't understand persistence, said Marcus, running final pre-landing diagnostics. They take no for an answer. We're human. We've colonized places that actively tried to kill us for sport. Australia, Siberia, New Jersey. The planet killed the Zytharians, Zainab pointed out, though her tone suggested this was trivia rather than warning. The Zytharians tried to replace the ecosystem, countered Yuki. Classic colonial mistake. We're not here to conquer. We're here to integrate. We're here because the rent is free and no one else wants it, corrected Dmitri, which was close enough to the truth. Humanity had arrived in the galactic community late, energetic, and broke. Most desirable real estate was already claimed. What remained were the places other species had abandoned after learning expensive lessons. Humans, resourceful and historically comfortable with terrible decisions, had started calling these places opportunities. The landing sequence began with the sort of casual disregard for danger that made alien observers check their recording equipment to ensure they were properly documenting humanity's final moments. Thorvik, the Galactic Survey Corps liaison assigned to witness this catastrophe, watched from his monitoring station 3 light minutes away with mounting distress. He was a Phanari, a species of methodical amphibious beings who approached problems with careful deliberation and multiple contingency plans. Watching humans operate gave him symptoms his physicians couldn't classify. The Perseverance descended through Vidantia 7's atmosphere, trailing fire and attitude. Its heat shields, glowing as atmospheric friction, announced their arrival to everything below. The jungle noticed. Planetary-scale fungal networks pulsed with awareness. Chemical signals cascaded through root systems, and somewhere in the depths of the continental forests, things that passed for trees began preparing defenses. They touched down in what previous surveys had optimistically labeled Clearing 7A, which had been carved from the jungle by the Krelleth military exactly 27 years ago. The jungle had reclaimed it in 26 and a half. What should have been open ground was now a riot of vegetation featuring plants that had clearly been comparing notes on how to kill things more efficiently. The landing thrusters scorched a perimeter, which the local flora would take as a declaration of war. Atmospheric composition nominal, reported Yuki, already unsuited and breathing Vidantia's air with evident pleasure. Oh, the pheromone complexity is stunning. Some of those pheromones are probably saying fresh meat has arrived, noted Marcus, but he was already unsuited too, surveying the perimeter with an engineer's eye for structural possibilities. The first attack came within 20 minutes, which was actually slower than expected. A vine thicker than Marcus's torso erupted from the undergrowth with enough force to dent their landing strut. It was covered in thorns that oozed something that sensors identified as a neurotoxin complex enough to require 17 syllables to properly name. Marcus looked at it, looked at his plasma cutter, looked back at the vine and grinned. Right then, anyone bring barbecue sauce? What followed would have horrified xenobiologists across the galaxy. Marcus didn't destroy the vine. He studied it, identified its growth pattern, waited for its strike cycle, and then used a precision torch to cauterize specific nodes that controlled its aggressive reflexes. The vine spasmed, withdrew slightly, and then settled into what could charitably be called confusion. "See, she's just territorial," Marcus explained, patting the vine like it was a particularly aggressive dog he was training. "You don't kill her, you show her you're not food. Boundaries, yeah?" "That vine has dissolved 3 Zytharian colonists," noted Dimitri dryly. "Well, they probably didn't ask nicely." Yuki was already collecting samples, her portable lab analyzing the chemical warfare the jungle was deploying. "Fascinating. The plants here communicate through a hybrid system, fungal root networks combined with airborne chemical signals. They're not individual organisms, they're more like colonial neurons in a distributed intelligence. So the entire jungle is one big brain that wants to eat us," summarized Zainab. "One big brain that perceives settlers as an invasive threat," corrected Yuki. "We need to speak its language." Over the next week, the human approach to Vidantia 7 diverged so dramatically from standard colonial procedure that Thorvik filed 3 separate reports asking for guidance and received only stunned silence in response. Instead of clearing the jungle, they studied it. Instead of establishing a fortified perimeter, they identified the jungle's territorial boundaries and negotiated space within them. The negotiation involved chemical analysis, careful pruning, and Marcus having a very animated conversation with a particularly aggressive strangler fig that Yuki had named Bernard. "You cannot name the hostile flora," protested Thorvik during one of his increasingly desperate check-ins. "Bernard isn't hostile anymore," countered Marcus. "We had a chat. He gets the eastern perimeter, we get everything west of the supply cache. Gentleman's agreement. It's a plant. It tried to strangle Jenkins yesterday. Jenkins was poking its root system. Bernard has boundaries. We respect them, he respects ours." The real breakthrough came when Zainab identified what the jungle actually wanted. Every previous colonization attempt had treated Vidantia 7 as hostile territory to be conquered. But the planet's aggressive ecosystem wasn't mindless violence. It was defense. Centuries of invasive species arriving, trying to reshape the environment, draining resources, and then abandoning their toxic infrastructure, had taught Vidantia's interconnected biosphere that newcomers meant destruction. "We need to offer value," Zainab explained during a planning session. "Every species that came here took resources. We need to give something back." "Like what?" asked Dimitri. "The jungle has everything it needs to murder us efficiently." "Diversity," said Yuki, her eyes lighting with that particular gleam that meant she had a dangerous idea. "Look at the genetic markers. This ecosystem is incredibly successful but genetically bottlenecked. Too much competition, not enough cooperation. It's evolutionarily stuck. We introduce controlled genetic variation, beneficial symbiotic relationships, and we become valuable rather than threatening." It was insane. It was unscientific. It was exactly the sort of lateral thinking that made humans simultaneously frustrating and effective. They started small, introducing earth fungi that could break down the abandoned Krelleth equipment safely, converting toxic materials into nutrients the jungle could use. Yuki carefully crossbred local flowering species with pollinator-friendly variants, expanding ecological niches. Marcus began constructing platforms in the canopy, using techniques that didn't require killing the host trees, instead working with their growth patterns. The jungle noticed. Chemical signals shifted from destroy invaders to observe strangers. Attack frequencies decreased. A massive carnivorous plant, that had been preparing to swallow their main hab unit instead shifted position, creating shade that regulated temperature. "I think we just got approved," noted Marcus, staring up at several tons of plant matter that could liquefy him, deciding to be neighborly instead. Building the tree village began as necessity and evolved into collaboration. The ground level of Vidantia 7 was a death trap, where predatory roots and aggressive ground cover made permanent structures impossible. But the canopy, that was different territory. Here, hundreds of meters above ground, massive trees formed platforms and networks that could support structures if you understood their language. Marcus understood. He approached construction like negotiation, identifying trees that were already growing in useful configurations, then augmenting rather than replacing their natural structure. Load-bearing platforms used living wood reinforced with human metallurgy, creating hybrid structures that grew stronger over time rather than degrading. He installed supports that flexed with the tree's movement, buildings that swayed but never broke. "It's like building on a ship," he explained, securing a suspension bridge between two massive platforms. "You don't fight the motion, you work with it. These trees have been here for centuries. They know what they're doing better than we do." Yuki contributed by establishing symbiotic relationships throughout the construction. Every human structure incorporated local flora, not as decoration but as functional systems. Bioluminescent fungi provided lighting. Water-collecting bromeliads became integrated plumbing. A species of vine with natural insulation properties was cultivated into living walls. The result was a settlement that looked nothing like traditional colonial architecture, where other species built rigid structures that declared dominance over environments. Humans created something that blurred the line between civilization and ecosystem. The village grew organically, platforms branching from central hubs, suspension bridges connecting different levels, vertical gardens producing food while maintaining the jungle's aesthetic. Dmitri watched it take shape with something approaching satisfaction. Command wanted a standard colonial footprint. "This looks like we're raising a civilization in the trees." "We are," confirmed Zenub, reviewing the terraforming data that showed the jungle's acceptance of their presence. "And the jungle is raising us right back." Mutual growth. Symbiosis at a macro scale. The crisis came in the second month, which was actually impressive longevity for a Vidantia 7 settlement. The jungle's distributed intelligence, having observed and assessed the humans, decided to run an experiment. Every plant within a kilometer radius attacked simultaneously in what appeared to be coordinated behavior. Vines struck with mathematical precision, carnivorous flowers deployed paralytic compounds in synchronized waves, and the fungal network released spores that turned the air thick enough to see. It should have been the end. Previous settlements had fallen to far less. Instead, the humans did something the jungle's vast intelligence hadn't predicted. They didn't fight back. Marcus shut down their defensive systems. Yuki opened the hab units to full atmospheric exchange. Zenub broadcast chemical signals that essentially translated to "we're listening." "You've disabled our defenses during an attack," observed Thorvik, his voice reaching frequencies that indicated severe stress. "This is suicide. This is communication," corrected Dmitri, standing exposed on the main platform as vines writhed around him in patterns too complex to be random. "The jungle isn't trying to kill us. It's testing whether we'll revert to type under pressure." Yuki was recording everything, her analysis software working overtime. "It's a language. Look at the vine patterns, the spore distribution, the chemical gradients. This isn't an attack. It's a question." "What's the question?" demanded Marcus, though he was already preparing his answer, hands moving to construction tools rather than weapons. "Can you coexist, or will you conquer when threatened?" The human response was characteristically insane. They built during the assault. Marcus used the attacking vines as structural elements, weaving them into support systems for new platforms. Yuki collected the spores and cultivated them in controlled environments, analyzing their properties for beneficial applications. Zenob mapped the chemical signals and began broadcasting responses, a conversation in pheromones and root system pulses. The jungle's attack slowed, shifted, transformed into something else entirely. Vines that had been striking began growing in useful patterns. Spores that had been choking revealed properties that could preserve food. The massive carnivorous plants repositioned themselves into a perimeter that would defend against actual threats. The distributed intelligence had received its answer. These newcomers would integrate, not conquer. They could be trusted with coexistence. What emerged over the following weeks was unprecedented in galactic colonial history. The tree village didn't just survive, it thrived in active partnership with an ecosystem that had destroyed every previous attempt at settlement. Human structures grew from living trees. Jungle plants adapted to human needs without losing their essential nature. The fungal network began routing nutrients to human gardens, while humans cultivated species that expanded the network's range and efficiency. 3 months after landing, an official Galactic Survey Corps inspection team arrived, fully expecting to catalogue another failure and possibly retrieve whatever remains could be identified. What they found instead violated several assumed principles of xenobiology and all conventional wisdom about Deathworld colonization. The inspection ship contained representatives from 5 species, including a deeply apprehensive Thorvik, who had been watching this insanity unfold remotely and still didn't quite believe the data. They approached Vidantia 7 with extreme caution, their sensors detecting the massive colony ship and confirming life signs but struggling to differentiate human settlement from natural jungle, because there barely was a difference anymore. Location confirmed, reported the Quolox scanner operator, his tentacles twitching with confusion. But readings show the jungle has absorbed the settlement. No, corrected Thorvik quietly, staring at his screen. The settlement has merged with the jungle. That's not absorption, that's integration. They landed at the coordinates Dimitri provided, touching down on a clearing that was clearly maintained, but allowed to grow wild at its edges. The inspection team emerged in full environmental suits, weapons ready for the notorious Vidantia 7 hostility. Marcus met them wearing shorts and a shirt that appeared to be woven from local plant fibers. He was drinking something from a gourd that was still growing. "Welcome to hell," he said cheerfully. "Mind the vines on your left, that's Bernard's territory, and he's particular about visitors. Stay on the path, and you'll be fine." The inspection tour was conducted in stunned silence. The team walked through a village that shouldn't exist, where humans lived in structures grown as much as built, where deadly plants formed living architecture, where children played in gardens that contained enough toxins to kill a platoon but were somehow safe. Everywhere they looked, the line between human civilization and alien ecosystem had blurred into something new. "How?" demanded the lead inspector, a Zytharian, whose species had lost an entire colony to this planet. "Our people had centuries of botanical expertise. We were masters of plant manipulation. How did you succeed where we failed?" Yuki appeared from a vertical garden, where she was cultivating hybrid orchids, her hands covered in soil and her expression bright with enthusiasm. "You tried to control the ecosystem. We tried to join it. Different philosophy, different results. The planet killed our colonists in 9 days. The planet defended itself against colonists who wanted to replace it," corrected Yuki. "We wanted to live with it. Huge difference." Dmitri led them to the central platform, where the village's administrative center occupied a massive tree that had to be 1,500 years old. The inside was carved from heartwood but still living, a hollow trunk converted to human use while maintaining the tree's health. It smelled of sap and earth and human coffee, which someone had successfully cultivated in the canopy. "Your report will say this is impossible," stated Dmitri, pouring drinks from a local fruit that the Fenari database listed as lethally poisonous. It tasted like citrus and starlight. The galaxy spent 14,000 years deciding which worlds could support settlement. You created a classification system, conducted surveys, established protocols, very scientific, very thorough, and very wrong, asked Thorvik quietly. "And very limited," corrected Dmitri. "You categorized planets based on whether they matched what you considered habitable. Humans categorize habitability differently. If we can breathe the air, and the environment doesn't immediately kill us, we call that a starting point. Everything else is negotiable." The formal inspection lasted 3 days and generated a report that would reshape galactic understanding of planetary colonization. Vidantia 7 was reclassified from Class 12 Death World to Class 4 Challenging Environment, Human Compatible. The change triggered a cascade of reassessments. If humans could thrive on Vidantia 7, what did that say about the other abandoned worlds? Within a year, 3 more human colonies had established themselves on planets the galaxy had written off. Within 5, humans had created a thriving network of settlements in places other species considered uninhabitable. The economic implications alone restructured interstellar trade, as suddenly resources on death worlds became accessible through human intermediaries who found the environments merely inconvenient. Thorvik visited the Vidantia 7 settlement again, 2 years after initial contact, this time as part of a delegation studying human colonization techniques. The tree village had grown exponentially, now housing 15,000 humans and spreading across 3 canopy networks. It had become a tourist destination, which should have been absurd for a planet that used to kill visitors, but humans had that effect on impossibilities. He found Dmitri on a high platform, observing the sunset paint the jungle canopy in colors that shifted as bioluminescent plants began their evening displays. The view was objectively beautiful, which seemed offensive given this planet's history. "Your people have made the galaxy reconsider what's possible," Thorvik said, settling beside the human with careful movements. The platform swayed gently, alive beneath them. "We just approached the problem differently," replied Dmitri. "Every species that came here tried to conquer, we tried to belong. Turns out belonging is easier. 14,000 years of galactic civilization, and humans teach us basic ecology in 2 years. Don't feel bad," said Dmitri, with the faint smile that passed for amusement on his weathered face. "Humans spent most of our history making the same mistakes on Earth. We learned the hard way that you can't conquer ecosystems, you can only join them or die fighting. And now you export this philosophy. We export what works. If other species want to reconsider their abandoned colonies through a human lens, that's their choice. We're just demonstrating possibilities." Below them, the jungle breathed a living network of distributed intelligence that had learned to accommodate and even welcome the strange new organisms that built in its canopy and spoke in chemical poetry. Somewhere in the fungal networks that connected continents, information flowed about these peculiar mammals who had transformed from threat to symbiote. The jungle was learning. Humans were learning. Evolution was happening in real time, a collaboration between biology and determination. The galaxy had spent 14 millennia cataloging which worlds would kill settlers, establishing careful boundaries between civilization and wilderness, defining habitability in rigid terms that assumed conquest was the only relationship possible between species and environment. They had created systems, classifications, protocols that protected their people and limited their possibilities. Then humans arrived, looked at all those careful warnings, and asked the most dangerous question in any language. But what if we tried anyway? The answer, it turned out, was tree villages in impossible jungles, thriving settlements on death worlds, and a complete reconsideration of what it meant to colonize a planet. Humans didn't conquer Vidantia 7, they joined it, adapted to it, and in doing so demonstrated that the galaxy's understanding of habitability had been suffering from a catastrophic lack of imagination. Thorvik looked at the thriving settlement, at humans living in harmony with an ecosystem that had destroyed everyone else, and made a note for his report. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization may not be their technology or their persistence, but their fundamental refusal to accept that anything is truly impossible. This trait is simultaneously their greatest strength and most terrifying characteristic. Recommend continued observation and possibly learning to think like them, though this may require therapeutic support. Dmitri caught the Fenari's expression and laughed, the sound carrying across the canopy where humans and jungle had achieved something the galaxy hadn't thought possible. "Welcome to Vidantia 7, he said, "where the impossible just takes a little longer." The jungle, in its distributed wisdom, seemed to agree. And somewhere in its vast consciousness, it was already planning how to better accommodate its strange new partners, these determined mammals who looked at death worlds and saw home.